There we are. Good start to the day. Okay, so I'm gonna fire up Chrome so that I can start creating a GitHub repository. I'm going to go to set location for where I want my Rails files to go, which is going to be in my, I think I just have a Rails folder here somewhere. Rails projects, that'll do. Okay, open command window here. All right, so I'm just quickly checking my version of Rails, and then I'll use the Rails new command to actually create this new project. In the meanwhile, I can also go over here and load up GitHub. And go here. My computer feels very slow today. Okay, new repository. So I'm going to call this routing pages with Rails. Demo of static and then semi-static page routing in Rails. And the version of Rails we're using is 4.1.6. So there's my empty GitHub repository. Over here I can do a Rails new routing pages. So the routing pages is the name of my project. That's going to create for me the directory structure that is Rails and the files that go into those directories. And now I might choose to open up a few other command prompts to that same folder. 3 is usually a good number. And so one of them will just sit and run the server, one of them is going to be used for Git, and the other one is going to be maybe for the console. Let's see. So Git status won't work yet. Why is it working? Interesting. Does Rails make my project Git enabled to begin with? Is there a .git folder inside of it? Oh, I went to the wrong one. This is the demo that I made last time with the other class. Routing pages is where I want to go. Now this shouldn't work. Good. Okay. So I have to initialize it. So I say git init dot, meaning initialize the current folder. I'm inside of the project. Always remember to cd to the project folder. None of the commands that you run that Rails needs to run, none of them can be run from outside the folder. You need to be in your project folder. So here's the initialization step. I get status will now tell me that it detects a bunch of these folders and files. And lastly, I get to say no to Java auto update. This is done running, so I can stage all my files and commit them with a commit message of initial commit of a new Rails project using 4.1.6. If I want to push these to GitHub, I can add my remote. I have public-private keys set up, so I can use SSH. If you don't have public-private keys set up, you have to use the HTTP remote by selecting that. And what you're copying and pasting is this line here. And so depending on if you have HTTP or SSH selected, the line actually changes. with HTTP, you will have to provide your GitHub username and password on push. Oh, and I'm not in the project folder because I opened up a different command prompt here. So this is the routing pages. The remote is now added to make sure it's actually there. I can do a remote -v and it shows me my remote. So I have a remote named origin, and now I want to get push to origin from my master branch. And we're good. So we now have a Rails project. I can start a server. We have it synchronized with GitHub. We can now, as we make changes, capture them to commits locally, and then maybe at the end of the class, I'll push all of those changes back to this this Git remote. So I don't have to do the push to the remote. It's an optional part of the version control process. The version control actually happens all on my own machine, and the push is just mirroring my local repository to a remote location. Okay, so maybe I'll open up Notepad here just so we can sketch out some ideas. So I've said that initially I want something like, I'm going to have some URLs. I'm going to have where they route to, some controller, and some action that they route to, and then there'll be an associated view for each one of them. So I'm going to have a slash pages / about us / pages contact us and / pages / services. So those are the 4 URLs that I want to route to. They're all going to go to a controller called pages, and in this case the index action I want to run. In this case, pages is going to go to here. I will make them actually perfectly match, and then for the last one I will make it so that it doesn't match at all. So the root is going to index, about us is going to an about us, contact us is going to a contact us, a little bit different from what I put on the board. But here it's going to go to something called Wacky Wednesday, just to demonstrate that there doesn't need to be a mapping between the words that are used in the URL and the action, although it makes it a little harder to follow as a programmer now. It makes sense for as a programmer to look at this code and expect this about us to map to an about us action, where it's not initially obvious why services would map to something called Wacky Wednesday, other than the fact that I'm demoing that out. The associated views, it's not up to us. We can override this functionality, but it's not up to us to define this association. This is a Rails convention in that the name of the action has a view of the same name. So there will be an app views, and in the pages subfolder, that's the name of the controller that we're working with. So each controller has its subdirectory within views where all of its views go. There's going to be an index.html.erb. And for about us, there's going to be a about us.html.erb. I copy this and paste this in here. There's going to be a contact us as well. And there's going to be a Wacky Wednesday. So again, I'm going to just restate the part of this that is convention and the part of this that is programmer determined. The programmer determined aspect of things is going to be us working with the routing file, and that's the file that is found at config/routes.rb. That's our routing file. That's going to define the mappings of the URLs to the controller actions. And so we're going to effectively write code to do those mappings. The mappings of the actions to their associated views is automatic. This is Rails automatically loading the view with the same name as the action in the subfolder with the same name as the controller in the views folder. And initially, I'm going to have no models in my system at all. Everything's just going to be hard-coded files. And so my server should be up and running now. I can test that out by going to localhost 3000 and seeing that welcome to Rails page. Also gonna boot up Komodo for editing purposes. So this is good. This means my server's running. I can be happy to know that's this one right here. And notice that it displays every connection request that's made comes in and is displayed within the console here. So when we went and fetched the root, the server started a GET request to slash, and it tells you exactly what it does. It went and it loaded up this baked-in welcome controller and loaded up the index action of that controller and displayed some HTML. It tells you which views it used. It tells you how long it actually took and the HTTP status code that was sent by way of HTTP headers. Okay, now Komodo's up and running. Inside of Komodo, I'm going to open up my config routing file, so my routes.rb. So we'll be doing a lot of work with that. And I need to, from the command prompt, generate the controller that I want access to. The controller, as I said, is going to be called pages. And so I'm going to say Rails G for generate a controller called pages. And if I know about the actions that I wish to create, I can type them in now and have them pre-built for me. Like it'll put little method stubs into the pages controller. It'll define a method called, if I put about us here, about us, and it'll make this file, this about us.html.erb. So maybe I'll do it for two of them. I'll say, okay, right off the hop, I know there's going to be an about us and a contact us, and we'll manually build the index in the Wacky Wednesday one, just to see the differences. So those are optional parameters. The required parameter is the name of our controller. So Rails generated controller named pages, optionally create views and stub out methods for about us and contact us. And so that file, the controller file, although more than just the controller file is going to be generated, but the controller file will end up in the app controllers folder, and we're also going to get this views pages subfolder with two files put into it as well. And so anytime you run a generation command, Rails is going to show you down below all the things that were either created, routed, invoked, etc. So you can see here's where it's creating the app controllers pages controller. It tried to sort of pre-bake in some routes for us, which is good, sort of what we wanted. And you can see it also has made some views for us. We have to go and make a few others. So if we go to the app views folder, we can open up these existing views. Oh, and I'm in the wrong folder. That would be bad to start doing this. No. In my Windows Explorer, I've just gone into the wrong Rails project. This is the one I actually want. So there's my routing file. And then inside of my app views, where did you go? I ran that all inside of the wrong folder as well. Okay, Kyle, let's not name projects similarly in the future. Okay. Routing pages. Rerun. So I just hit the up arrow a few times because Windows keeps a history of commands, so I can rerun that in the actual folder where I want it to be executed. So I was in the wrong project path. Here's the routing file, and initially it contains a number of comments, a large number of comments that are just examples of the various type of routing that you can do. The only code that's in here to begin with is if we went and deleted all these comments, you'd see that it's really just a 2-line file. Rails, application, routes, draw, do. All of this is like, there's a sort of a master class called Rails that all Rails applications have access to. You access the Rails application itself by going to the class rails.application. What do we want to define right now? Routes. Why they named it draw, not exactly sure, but that's just what it's called. And within the draw do end block is where we end up creating all of our routing information. That's where we configure our routes. So my controller is now properly run, and so now there is a pages subfolder inside of my app views folder, and there is a pages controller inside of the app controllers folder. The pages controller inherits from something called application controller, and because I mentioned about us and contact us from the command line, it built those methods, empty methods for us. This application controller is actually right here. Here it is, application controller, and it inherits from something called action controller base, which should look familiar to you based on what happens with models. Models directly inherit from active record base. Controllers have this sort of middleman object, application controller, which inherits from action controller base, sort of getting all of what it is to be a controller. And then each of the controllers inherits from that application controller, meaning that what we can use this class for is to put shared functionality that all of our controllers would share. So if we have stuff that needs to be shared across our entire system in terms of being the controller's responsibility, well, all controllers inherit from this class, so I can stash things in here that will then get inherited by all of my controllers. So a little bit of OO inheritance baked right into controllers. We just know as Rails programmers that there's often stuff that needs to be shared across all of our controllers, so there's a place for that, which is this application controller. Okay. So I've gone and created that, so I can go and get status. I can see new files and folders. It's sort of hard to read it, but it's detected changes to some files and folders. I can stage those changes. I can commit them. Added a pages controller using a generator. Let's try to route to the About Us page. So in the pages subfolder of the views folder, there's an about us.html.erb. I'm going to change it so that it has an H2 inside of it that says about us. And then in here, well, maybe I'll just put some lorem ipsum, lorem ipsum. So I'm just going to generate some filler text. That'll go in here. Oops. Why didn't you copy and paste? Control C, Control V, Shift Insert. Okay, that worked. And maybe a second paragraph. Okay. So I've got some filler. I can't just go and, oh, I can. One thing we'll notice is if I go to my routing file, I have to close it because I made some changes to it. I removed a whole bunch of comments. But if I reopen it, we'll also see that when I ran the controller generation, it went and modified my routing file to define some routes for us. If I put in a route that doesn't exist into my application, I get a routing error. It tells me that no HTTP GET to this particular path exists. And then it shows me below what routes it does know about. And it knows about two types of GET routes. So routes that are accessible by either by hard coding them into a location area and pressing enter, or by following a link. It knows about a /pages/about us, and it knows about a /pages/contact us, and it knows to route those appropriately to the about us action of the pages controller and the contact us action of the pages controller. And again, it only knows that because I specified that at controller generation time. So when I went here and said Rails generate a controller called pages that has these two actions, you can see here's where it created those routes for us right here. So it's built two of my routes for me, and it's built them to look like this. A GET request to /pages/about us. And then the default is, if you just provide a single parameter to GET, the default is the thing that starts the URL is the controller, followed by a /, followed by the action. We want to be a little bit more specific with our routes, and so we can make what's happening implicitly, we can make it explicit in that I'm going to say this URL should route to, and I'm using the hash rocket to represent a mapping, the pages controller of, the pages controllers about us. And same where this is having, there's some implicit mapping happening here, I'm going to make that explicit by saying this. I haven't changed my routes in any way. So if I went back over to my route that doesn't exist and reloaded it, this still all looks the same. Meaning I should be able to go to /pages/about us. And I see the about us. So what's happened is the routing system gets our URL, looks to see if it matches a particular route in the system. It does. It says, okay, I now need to call up the pages controller's about action. Runs it. It's empty. But what happens at the end of any action is next, the associated view is automatically loaded. And the associated view is in the app views pages folder, and it's going to be named after the action. It's going to be that about us.html.erb file that we put the lorem ipsum into. It's this one here. Same thing is going to happen for contact us. It's no different. Right now, contact us, the view has just a little bit of seeded HTML in it, but we can let's just change it slightly to say contact us. It even helpfully tells you where it's actually located. So if you view it in the browser, you sort of know where in the file system you find it. The route's already defined. We already have a route to /pages/contact us that goes here. And again, by going here, it means it's going to run this empty contact us, and then automatically loads app views pages contact us.html.erb. So pages, because this is the pages controller. So I should be able to go to contact us. And that's good. By separating out the URL from where it is routing to, gives me the flexibility of doing things like, well, what if I want just to go to /about us and /contact us, but still load up the pages that are associated with it, I can do so. Change the URL portion of my mapped route, and now this route doesn't work anymore, but this one does.
Do you have multiple routings?
To the same place?
Yeah.
Let's see. So to define a new route, I specify the HTTP verb I wish the route to match. So if it's a GET request, i.e. like a link or a URL, we type GET, but I could also start a route by saying POST, I'm about to receive a form or whatnot. But here we'll say GET, and we'll say tester McBester is going to route to pages about us. And save that, and go to /tester McBester about us, and /about us goes there as well. So yes, the answer is you can have multiple routes that route to the same location, which is interesting. And this is, again, this flexibility where our instincts tell us that URLs map to file system locations, but with Rails that's not really true, right? There's no such thing as tester McBester anywhere in my file system. It exists solely in the routing file and goes to a pages about us. So demoing the fact that multiple routes can point to the same controller action. We also wanted there to be a home page and a services page. And so I can start defining those routes. The services page will look sort of the same. So get services should route to pages. And here we said we're going to just throw convention to the wind and have it route to something called Wacky Wednesday. And again, conventions are sort of there for a reason, right? We probably would never have such a strange mapping. But again, this is just to demonstrate that this is a possibility. And so when we go to /services, we're going to load up this Wacky Wednesday. If I was doing this, I wanted my code to look pretty, I might sort of line those all up so that at the end of the day it sort of looks like a table. And when routing to the root, so when we want to add this home, there's a special root where we say the root should map to, and here pages index. And so I've now mapped all of the routes. So I've done like this to this mapping, the URL to controller action mapping. There is no index action yet. So let's see what happens when we try to go to the root. When we try to go to a route that exists, but an action which doesn't. And so we get a fairly helpful message which says unknown action. The index action could not be found. So the routing system attempted to route to something called index, but it wasn't there, and it was trying to find it in the pages controller. So that's just a little clue to us that we have to go over to our pages controller and make that index action. So I could say def index. I could get rid of all of this and hit F1 in the process. Now it exists. What'll happen is it'll try to load up automatically after it runs the index.html.erb in the app views pages folder, which doesn't exist, right? So in the app views pages folder, we don't yet have that. So let's see what happens when we have a route that exists. So here's the route that exists. We now have the correct action, but we don't have the view. And now it complains about a missing template. Okay, well, now I can make that template. So I say, okay, this needs to be here. We need to have something called, actually, just to show you one other thing, I can circumvent that process. So the automatic loading of a view can be circumvented by running a render command. And so here I could say render, and I could render out another actions view. And so now if I went to slash, if I just went to the home, I get about us. And this is interesting. The about us action was not run. I'm just sort of hijacking the use of the about us view. So it's almost like at the end of every one of these actions, it's almost like there's an implicit call to render a view named after the action. It's like this is just sort of done automatically for us. But we can do something like this, or I can even just say don't use, like maybe for testing purposes, don't use the view at all. I just want to wire some text up. So just wire out the text. Hello, class. So render this text, go back over here, renders the text, and it just renders it. This circumvents the entire view layout in that there's no layout at all when I view source. There's just the text, hello, class. So we can circumvent things if we want to. I don't want to. I want to actually just go and make my index.html.erb. And this is like welcome home. This is our home page. And then in our routing file, we also said that there is to be this Wacky Wednesday action. So I can put that in here too. Wacky Wednesday. And so there needs to be a view of the same name as well. Wacky Wednesday .html.erb. And inside of it is going to be our services page. So we have all of our routes defined. There's an about us, a contact us, a tester, make bester, a services, a route. We have all of the various actions that they map to. We've actually created all of those actions, index, about us, contact us, Wacky Wednesday, and then we have associated views for all of those. So any of these should work now. Here's my home. Here's my about us, my contact us, my services. They all work. And so again, I'll go to my command prompt and I'll just say git add my most recent changes, git commit them, wired up all my routes with associated actions and views. And what if I wanted now to have a menu that linked to all of these files or all of these locations? I shouldn't even say files. What if I wanted a menu that linked to all of my routes that was displayed at the top of every page? Well, something that's displayed across my entire website should go in the app views layout, because it's sort of where our shared code goes. It's where each view, which is partial HTML, gets injected. So anytime a view is loaded, it gets yielded where this yield keyword is and ends up in this document. So maybe in this document, I might have like a header that included like a navigation element, which itself had like a unordered list of LIs in it. We might think that the next step would be to start building hrefs manually. So like home and like about us and contact us. And that would work, right? So let's go and see this in action. I should now have this appear at the top of all of my pages, which should be an unordered list of 3 links. And I've just hard-coded in the routes because I know what they are. I know what they are from my routing file. So on any given page, I can now link back and forth. But earlier, I talked about the flexibility of routing, the fact that we could come into routing and we could say, no, what I really wanted is I do want these all on some kind of what appears to be like a subfolder. They're all pages, so I want them all to be at /pages. Just so there's almost like a hierarchy to my URL so that when people are at my website, they sort of know that they're viewing a static page. So I'll be /pages/something, except for the root. Now if I manually enter these, they work. But other than the home page, my hard-coded URLs don't work anymore because they're still going to the old location. So routing actually goes 2 ways. Routing we use to take in URLs and run code for us, run particular controller actions. But to gain full advantage of the routing, we can also get the routing to generate our URLs for us that we're going to use in our HTML. So we don't want to, every time we change the route, to have to go into our HTML and modify things. And so instead of manually building up our routes like this, we would do something like this. Instead of this manual route to home, I would use a Rails helper. So I'm going to go into ERB mode. So <% equals meaning echo out what I'm about to do. And I'm going to use the link to helper to build a link that has the text of home that is going to go to the root path. How do I know to use this word root path? Well, I can go to a route that doesn't exist, and it tells me about all those things. It tells me how to make use of them within link to. If I want to go to the root path, I use the root path. If I want to send someone over to the About Us page, I should go to pages_About Us path. And so knowing that, I could use link to make my About Us link, and it should be the pages. Here again, just make sure that this is, if I go to a URL that doesn't exist, I get this. Okay, I want to go to that. Like this. And then
you have to cause a routing error in order to know that?
Yeah, or you just go to your command prompt and you just say rake routes and it dumps the same information. So both of them, I just find I do it within the browser because it's faster. When I run rake routes, there seems to be a delay where it's sort of rake is sort of bringing up the Rails environment, whereas it's just a bit of a trick to put in a route that doesn't exist and get this back. And if I want to now go to this contact us, I can change this here. This is going to be the contact us path. And now I can remove those manually built ones. If I go back to my application and I go home, they all work. And they all route to /pages/about us and /pages/contact us. But again, if I make a change to my routing file, the about page is just going to be directly off the root. The contact one, for some reason, isn't. Although that might be a poor decision hierarchy-wise for the design of your web page, it's possible to do that. Let's go back over here. Oh, I see what's happened. It's actually changing the names of my routes. which I don't want. I want to be able to use the same name every time to different routes. So now I'm going to use another keyword that Rails gives me. It's like I get the ability to actually override the names of my routes. So these names here, I want to be able to lock them in and have them not change. So when I changed my About Us path, the name of the path helper changed. Well, I want those sort of to be written in stone. So I can say as, and I can give it a name. So I can say as about and as contact, and tester McBester was just there for testing. And this could be as services. This one's always as root. Now that I've named them something set in stone, I also get sort of shorter helpers. I just put the word underscore path at the end of any one of these things, and I can now path to them. So I now have access to an about path, which will never change, and a contact path that will never change. About Us now links to /about us, /contact us links to /pages /contact us, because the routes are defined differently. I go back and I change this and I put pages back in yet again. And now the link links properly. So I now have, by naming these things with the as keyword, and by using those names with the link to, I've avoided ever having to actually know anything about my URLs from within the view. The view is sort of kept in the dark as to where things actually route to. We refer to routes by name, and that way they can change at will, and we don't have to change any of our links. So the last one that I needed was my services. And did I give it a name? I did. I said as services. And so again, I can go back over here, and I can, this is be services path. Good, so I've got my routing all set up by way of this routing file. Again, at any time I can go from my command prompt and I can run rake routes and get a nice little table to display what my routing looks like, or I can also just go and put in a non-existent route and see that same information. So there's the path names, the verb that they get triggered on, what they look like when used in a URL, and the controller actions they map to. And again, I can go to Git and I can say added names to all routes and use those for link to based menu. And I can push that to GitHub if I wanted to. Now I've replicated what you could do without Rails a lot easier, right? Without Rails, I could go and just fire up, say, like the Apache web server, and I could have just straight up built static files, an index, an about us, a contact us, and a services, and I could have put them at set locations within my website, and I could have just served them up as static files. So everything that I've done here, we likely wouldn't use Rails to do this. It's a lot extra work. I have to set up this mapping, this routing from URLs to controller actions. None of my controller actions are even doing anything, so why do we need them, right? They're all empty. They're all just automatically loading up their associated views. So for this kind of website, if you're just building a static website that's serving up HTML documents, it's a lot of extra work to get it going. That said, with Rails, you would likely do this kind of work, but then give your client or yourself some extra functionality in that right now, if you were, say, building this for a client and the client wanted to change their About Us page, you would either have to give your client access to your source code and have them edit raw HTML, or they would have to go to you every time they wanted something changed. They were like, oh, I want that ipsum capitalized on the About Us page, and you would go in and you would change them, and you might build them or whatever, and it would be a back and forth. But with Rails, we can put a database behind this thing, right? I can go and say, well, seems a little bit of extra work, so I've gone into all this work to set up my routings and all this stuff and have Rails involved. Why am I just serving up static files? Why don't I go and have Rails generate for me a model called page, or called like a CMS page, or content page, maybe content page. I struggle with naming things always. Content page. Page seemed a little just too generic. And we'll just say a page has a title and a content. That's it. So the title will be a string, and the content of the page will be text. The difference between those two data types is that a string will end up in the database as something like a varchar limited to 255 characters, whereas text will be a text blob and it won't have a maximum size. So I'll generate this model now, and now I can actually go and start building up some CRUD for the user of my website to be able to go in and sort of modify pages on their own by way of like a web view, and then displaying them as well, but displaying them from the database, so that it's like we're not going to have a separate contact us .html.erb and a separate about us.html.erb and a separate Wacky Wednesday.html.erb. We're going to have one view that would probably have an h1 in it for where the title should go, and then some paragraphs for the content to go. We're going to share that. I'm going to skip the CRUD part today because we've seen that. We've seen how I can do really quick CRUD by way of scaffolding, and we've also seen that we can sort of manually build up some of those CRUD elements. What I will do is I will run rake db migrate to actually create the associated database. So from a content page, I should get a content pages table, and it will have 4 columns. There'll be the title and content columns that I specified, and ID, sorry, 5 columns, ID, and then the 2 timestamps, created at and updated at. And if I go to my Rails console, I can just put a bit of information in there. Just to get us up and running. So the Rails console just brings up an interactive Ruby prompt, but an interactive Ruby prompt that has access to our Rails application, including our models. So I can do sort of command line CRUD from the console. So I can do things like a content page.create, where I specify a title of about us and the content. Let's take some of that lorem ipsum, but not too much. So there is a About Us page. I can also go and create a Contact Us page. I can create a Services page. I can create a home page. And now if I do like a content page.count, there's 4 pages in my system. My pages controller was referencing all this stuff. And I'm going to blow that all away. I'll leave index in. I had an About Us, and I had a Contact Us, and I had a Wacky Wednesday. I'm going to blow all those files away. So in here, and usually when I blow away files, I'll do so using Git. So Git sort of becomes aware of those removals. So I might, git rm my, let's see, my app views pages, git rm app views pages about has local modifications. Okay, so there was some, before I go and remove these pages, the Git has detected that I'd actually changed them. So it's like, okay, you're trying to remove something that there was a change in, and all of your changes should be backed up in source control. So first I'll just stage all those changes. Pre-pages model revamp, new content page model. And now I should be able to go and delete those, the contact, and even the Wacky Wednesday one. So I only have an index. My routing file, strip all this away. As far as the index goes, I'll leave it for now, just with this welcome to home. So that's the only thing that's going to work right now. We have an index that says welcome to home. I'm going to get a bunch of routing errors because my application layout still is trying to link to all these things that no longer exist. And so I have to also remove those. Welcome home with a link to home. What I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to be able to go and load up individual pages in one of two ways, like a get request to /pages/ initially I'll do it by primary key. So get request to /pages/ some ID should load up the pages controllers, and I'm going to create a new action called show. And I can give it a name as page, because that's what I'm showing here is a single page, and I'll just give it a name in quotes. So that means if I go to /pages/ some identifier like 2, whatever has an ID of 2, and we can see that from the console. So content page dot find 2. That's my contact us page. That's what should be loaded. Initially this won't work because it says there's no show action. So I got to go build it. And here I want to load up a page, and I want to make it available to an associated view. So I need, because at the end of this, the associated view will load, and the associated view is going to be the app views pages show.html.erb. So I'll make that file. Show.html.erb. I'll open it up here. It's going to get access to some kind of instance variable that I'm going to define. And it's going to do things like, let's say that instance variable is called page, because it represents a single page. It's going to maybe display the title of the page inside of h1, and then maybe inside a paragraph tag, it might display the page content. So ERB with the equals means echo, so take this data and echo it. I need to make that instance variable accessible, so there needs to be a page. I'm finding a page by ID because that's how I defined my route. I said I'm going to have a route that's going to have a placeholder for an identifier in it. And so now I'm going to say contact page, that's my model, dot find, just what I did in the console. Contact page dot find 2. Except I can't just hard code in 2. I mean, sure I could. If I hard code in 2, every URL I go to will load up the contact page. Because it's just hard coded in with the number 2. So it's ignoring this parameter. The parameter is properly triggering our route /pages /some ID. We've hard coded in 2. Where does that 2 end up? It ends up inside of this special thing called the params hash. And so just to be explicit about things, I'm going to create a separate variable. Page ID is going to be found in this params hash at position ID. And then I can use that page ID for my find. If in my route I had called this something other than ID, then in the params hash I would have to go to something other than ID here. Right? So if this was index, then this would have to be index. It's sort of Rails standard to call it ID though. And so now, about us, contact us, services, homepage. I've got a whole bunch of routes. I only need one route, compared to the whole bunch I had before, right? I had a custom routes for every one of my static pages. Now I have dynamic pages. If I was to build out some CRUD functionality here, we'd even have more URLs where the end user could go and maybe modify the contents of these pages. In my layout here, I could, if I wanted to, I could rebuild this header to display all of my appropriate routes. I'm just going to do that in the home page just to give us something to do in this index here. So in this index here, I'm going to load up all of my pages from my content page.all. So going to my model, loading them all up, and then inside of this index here, I can do something like go into ERB mode. I have access because I defined @pages inside of my index. What's going to happen is the associated view will load, which is going to be the app views pages index.html.erb. And it will have access to the pages collection. And same here. It will have access to the page object. And there'll be a content page object. And then in here, I could loop through those. I could say pages.each, and I could say do, and then for each one of them, I could call it page. And then I could close ERB mode. I could do this. Looping over each page, create an LI, and inside of it, I want to echo out a link to, and I want a link that uses the page's title. And initially, I'll have them all linked to nothing, just linking to the hash mark. So build some links for me, use each page's title. So I should now have one LI for every page that there is in my page, in my content pages table. So if I go to the home here, there's all my pages properly titled, but each one of them goes nowhere. Where do I want them to go? Well, that depends on the name of this route here. I named it page. So I want to go to the page path. So if you remember here, when I wanted to go to the root, I went to the root underscore path. Before, when we had routes that were named like about us and contact and whatnot, I had about path and contact path. I had names for all these things. But the name's a little bit more complicated in terms of a route that includes a dynamic portion, because how does that dynamic portion get built? So if I go here, it's all well and good to say, well, I'll go to the page path. But in order to actually build the URL, it needs to populate an ID inside of each URL. And where does it get that ID? Well, it gets it from the page variable, this one here. So I'm passing in an object that happens to have an ID property. That's why we call this ID, because it maps to the ID property of this page here, so that the page path knows where to actually path to. And now I've rebuilt my dynamic menu. I've got a link to the About Us page, got a link to the Contact Us page, Services page, to sort of a redundant link to the home page. From the back end, I could like modify. So my Contact Us page, I could go and pull it up. There's my contact page. I could change the page content to Wacky Day, and I could save it. And that's reflected from the outside world. And I still have routing flexibility in that these routes, I'm not manually specifying them whatsoever. I'm allowing the page path to build them using the page's ID. So in my routing here, I could shorten this just down to the letter P, for example. And now everything works, but all the URLs just are /p/some number. I'm going to capture this in Git. So some deletions. My deletions are staged for me. They're in green, so I'm going to handle those first. I'll just commit those deletions. So that's why we have this two-step process of staging and committing. There's a bunch of changes here in red that you can't see, like modifications to my pages controller and modifications to my layout. And a new file, which is the show.html.erb. But I don't want those to be committed at the same time as these deletions, because it's different things. Here I deleted a bunch of views I don't need anymore. So I'm going to commit those. I'm going to say git commit -m, removed a few static pages views. The git status shows me that there's still unstaged changes. I can stage them now. Git status shows me that I have staged the following additions and changes, and now I can commit those. Modified the pages controller to dynamically load pages from the content pages table. Right, always one sentence is what you're aiming for your commit messages. If you need more than one sentence, you've waited too long. I just read an article today on the internet, and what this article said was, stop putting auto-incremented IDs in your URLs, which is just what we've done. Right? These are auto-incremented IDs in our URLs. The argument of this blog post that I read was that you're leaking information to the outside world when you do that. If it's the numeric IDs of particular pages, it's not that big of a deal. But potentially, if someone notices that you're using this format, they can just start guessing URLs. And maybe some of that stuff you don't want them to guess at, right? Maybe you're making like a game online, and some pages are particular resources that you don't want the players to be able to discover by way of just trying URLs. You want them to get to it by way of like hyperlinks or posts or something like that. And so we might want something a little bit more like what we had before, like the ability to say /pages/about us. So almost coming full circle again, but now having a nice human descriptive URL, but still having the content backed in a database. So it's not like we're updating hard-coded HTML files anymore. We have a database where we can do CRUD work on these things. So this is the last thing I'll do today is I'll try to make these things a little bit more descriptive. Often what I do is I do an in-between kind of strategy where I would do something like this, /pages/id/slug. And what the slug is going to be that human readable thing. And the ID is there because I can still do really quick lookups in my database, right? Because if you look something up by primary key, it's like instant. Whereas if you didn't have an index to whatever your slug was going to be, it might be a slower lookup process. You can see I've done this on the Winnipeg election site. So if we go to any candidate, there's David Sanders, people, number, name. Human readable name, also Google readable, right? So Google's looking for content, it's looking for keywords to steer people to the right pages on the internet. And it doesn't just look for content in the page itself, it also looks for keywords in URLs. So this is helpful to tell Google that, okay, this is a page about this particular thing, David Sanders, a person. You can probably just look at this URL and know that because I've built a Rails application here, that there is a people controller. You can probably assume that there's a people's or a there are a people table in my database. Each individual person reflected by like a person object, and that David Sanders is ID 212. Somewhat problematic in that you're still giving numbers here, and especially because this is a political site, the numbers can sometimes have unintended consequences. So like person number 1, is that more important than person number 2? Well, someone might think that you were trying to assert that if you use that in your URL, right? If a particular candidate and you've had them as particular person number 1, politically that might not be the safest bet. When I first built the Winnipeg election site, I have like an archived version of it here. I didn't use the IDs at all, and then that bit me later on. And so there's always trade-offs. Let's see if this is going to load even. Why are you so slow? It's running on my server. Are you down? No, you're up. Well, we'll see if it loads up. What ended up happening, oh, here it is I would look up people straight by name. So when I had a route /candidate/name as a colon name, and then I would take this name, I would replace the underscore with a space, and I would do a lookup in my database table of a person that had that name. What's a potential problem with doing that? Type in a name that doesn't exist in your database. Okay, yeah, that is a problem, right? So I just put in something random. Gives me some weird Rails error. So yeah, there is obviously an issue there. Another thing is with IDs, with numeric IDs, you're guaranteed that they're unique. Because the database, the whole point of an index is that it's a unique identifier. Names are not unique identifiers, right? There are other people in the world with your name. Maybe, for the most part. It took me a long time to find another Kyle Geske, but there's one in North Dakota. There's always someone in North Dakota. Oh, really? That's there actually might be 2 Kyle Geskes in North Dakota. What's happening there? anyways, it bit me with this election because in the future we did this first Winnipeg election site for 2010, and then there was a by-election, and in the by-election there was someone who was running again, and I had no way of being able to distinguish the two different runs, right? I could only go to to their like /candidate/name. There wasn't any idea of like a candidacy, a unique candidacy per election. And also there would be the other problem of if two people ran with the same name. So my in-between process is this, to use the ID, but to also put this human readable thing in there. How do we do that? Well, we're gonna do something like this. We got an ID and a slug. And then I need to actually make that slug. And why I use the word slug is that's just what tends to be used when people talk about building URLs that have these kind of permalink capabilities. They tend to call the human readable thing the slug. So I have as well. Page path. It's pulling an ID out of the page path that's coming from my model. What if I went and opened up my model, which we haven't really done yet, but I have like a content pages model, and it's an object. And so I should be able to define like a slug method on it. And initially, let's just say that it always returns the string test slug. I now have a defined route that has a ID and a slug in it. And so when I'm routing to that particular page route, I'm saying that pull the required information from this page object. Let's see if Rails will pull it out automatically or I have to give it hints. I'm never quite clear about this. So I go back over here. It doesn't like that. Required keys slug, and it's because it's looking for the slug in the actual object itself, not as a method. And so here I can be very explicit about things. Build the page path, pulling the ID from the page ID, and pulling the slug from the page slug. One of them being a property, one of them being a method call. They all now go to a particular location, but they all have the same human readable slug, which is not what I want. What I want is that the self.name, right? I am in each one of these cases here, let's sort of pull out the context. We're looping through a collection of pages and working with a page object. The page object has things like an ID, a method called slug, but it also has like a title. That's what I want. I want my title to actually be my page slug, but I don't want, if the title includes spaces, to include spaces up here, because you can't validly use a space in a URL. It's not a valid URL. And so here, it's not name, it's title that I want to take. And Rails gives me this lovely parameterize. Turn it into a URL parameter, meaning it'll fix it up for me so that things like spaces become dashes and special characters get removed. And so now if I go back home, my about us has a URL of /pages/1 about us. My contact us does as well, as does my services. And my homepage has this long route associated with it, but remember my homepage also just has the regular old route associated with it as well. And so that was sort of our first look at doing something other than validation inside of a model. You could think of this as a little snippet of business logic, what a portion of the URL is going to look like, what the human readable slug in the URL is going to look like. It's going to be the object's title. I used self here just so that it was very obvious where title was coming from, but the self is optional. And I could just call title.parameterize. It's the title of the current object. That'll work as well. And I have a human readable URL, and you'll see I use these same kind of URLs on the Winnipeg election site. So the About Us page is here, pages / some numeric ID, and then a nice human readable and Google readable thing that goes in the URL. So that's all I wanted to cover today. It was sort of a journey from starting with completely static pages where we had routes that mapped to each one of them a specific view file. There was a lot of wiring involved, and what we were left with wasn't much better or maybe even worse than just putting up static files at Apache. But then we went and added some dynamic capabilities to the website by putting a table in the back end. I didn't bother coding up the CRUD, but we could have done so. We could have used scaffolding to give us sort of all that CRUD functionality so that those content pages were actually fully editable and creatable from the web. There are also gems that I could plug in to give me a whole administrative backend that I wouldn't have to code whatsoever. So for example, on the Winnipeg election website, I don't do any of that CRUD work myself at all. I just pull in a gem called ActiveAdmin. Oops, I gotta log in with this password. And ActiveAdmin automatically detects all of my models and builds CRUD actions for me. So if I go, here's pages, where's that About Us page? Here it is. I get the ability to delete it, to view it, or to edit it, and I didn't have to write any of this code. So not only do we have things like scaffolding, we have projects like ActiveAdmin, which I'd highly recommend using for your Rails project. It builds the whole back end of your project for you, the entire thing. It's just you plug in the ActiveAdmin gem, you tell it about the models that you wish to have admin access to, and you're done. It builds everything else for you. So it's a really incredible project. It also not only builds all that backend stuff for you, but it also knows about the associations between things, and it will make creating associated things a lot easier. So I have like people running in an election, but now for sort of forward flexibility, I also have people that are associated with candidacies. So you can have a person who could run in multiple elections over the years, each one being represented as a candidacy. So when I create a new candidacy, first thing I do is I pick which person this candidacy is for. And ActiveAdmin is automatically, it knows about the associations by way of my model, and it just says, oh, well, let me load up all the people for you. You can pick one of them. You can pick which electoral race they're currently running in, and you can create that candidacy. And I didn't have to build any of the HTML that dealt with these drop downs. I didn't have to fetch that data manually. ActiveAdmin does that all for me, because in my active record models, there are things like belongs to and has many definitions that define how all these things are related. So once again, the sort of my perpetual warning that Rails is big and complicated, but my hope is that I can do things like what I did today, is sort of focus on key elements of it. So today we focused primarily on the routing, but it's very hard to separate it out from everything else. So when we started working with the routing, it meant that we needed a controller. Each controller action needed views. We needed to do some ERB, etc. So it's like you can't just focus on one piece because they're all intertwined, but I'll try my best to narrow that focus for each of our lectures. And I will stop.